General McChrystal, Ambassador Eikenberry, welcome and thank you for being here this morning. This committee, this Congress, and the American people have been awaiting your testimony. Before I go into the substance of my remarks, I want to state at the outset that all of us support your mission in Afghanistan and the men and women serving under your command. For over 3 months, Washington has been mired in a substantial war debate. Pundits and academics alike have been weighing in on whether the conflict in Afghanistan is in our national interest and if this is a fight we can win. In the absence of a clear, authoritative voice during these months of the White House review, the course of the debate has followed a flood of leaks from the always popular, yet never accountable, anonymous source. To put it mildly, this was not helpful. During this time, the public support for the war waned, and I worry our mission suffered too. With the President's speech last week and your testimony here today, I believe we've finally turned a corner in this war. We must now move from the assessment stage to the execution stage of this strategy. Instead of asking if we can achieve success, we must now give the time, space, and resources that you need to succeed. Rather than questioning if the United States has a will to win, you, General McChrystal, Ambassador Eikenberry, and the thousands of U.S. military and civilians in Afghanistan will demonstrate the will of this mission to defeat al-Qaeda, rout the Taliban, and bring stability to Afghanistan. It's time that we conclude this chapter on the war debate in Washington and write the next chapter on national consensus and mission success. You, gentlemen, will have the pen. You shall be the authors of success. Today you will write the first page of this next chapter. After these hearings, Washington must step aside and let Kabul once again become ground zero in this conflict. General McChrystal and Ambassador Eikenberry, the task before you is enormous. I know that I speak for the entire committee when I say that you are the best people to take on this challenge. This country is blessed to have leaders like you in its service. In September, your written word when we received your assessment, we read your written word when we received your assessment. Today we need to hear you speak about the unwritten words between the lines of the assessment. This is your opportunity to speak to the citizens of this country and interested parties across the world. I think when they hear from you, they will be convinced of the soundness of our strategy and optimistic about the chances for our success. Fortunately, much of your assessment seems to have been internalized in Washington and by members of this committee. On Tuesday night, the President agreed to provide you with additional troops to execute a counterinsurgency strategy. The Commander-in-Chief responded to the urgency of the situation when he committed to deploy those forces as fast as possible. Last week, Secretary Gates testified that our aim is to reverse the Taliban's momentum, which is precisely what your assessment described as essential to preventing mission failure in Afghanistan. Yet the President's speech and subsequent testimony last week left me concerned that the administration did not adopt some of the fundamentals of your assessment. Nowhere in your assessment did I see discussion of a date certain to begin withdrawal. In fact, you wrote that the long-term fight will require patience and commitment. I believed your concern was that the Afghan people are waiting on the sidelines to see how committed we are. Did we demonstrate that commitment last week? On Thursday, Secretary Gates testified that he was persuaded by you and General Petraeus that beginning a period of transition on a date certain will, in fact, incentivize the Afghans. I look forward to your persuading us of the same today. Moreover, I could not find mention in your assessment of the need to put pressure on the Afghans to take on responsibility. Before last week's speech, I assumed, like many, that the Afghan national security forces were doing everything they could to get into the fight. While corruption in the realm of governance and development undermined our security efforts, I believe that the Afghan ministries of defense and interior were part of the solution and not part of the problem. In fact, the variable holding back the growth of the Afghan National Security Forces were things outside the control of Kabul, namely funds to pay for a larger force and more capacity on the part of NATO to train the Afghans. So where did this new narrative of putting pressure on the Afghans come from? What I did not hear last week was a commitment to follow the recommendation of your assessment and build an Afghan National Security Force of 400,000. Instead, Admiral Mullen spoke of taking it year by year. Again, I don't recall your assessment recommending incrementalism. I'm interested to hear how your headquarters will interpret last week's guidance from Washington. Finally, there is the critical question of resources. First, are 30,000 additional forces enough to win decisively? As you wrote in the assessment, resources will not win this war, but under-resourcing could lose it. Given the many leaks that you requested, at a minimum 40,000 additional forces, please explain why the President is not under-resourcing his own strategy. Will you have to cut the scope of the mission because you did not receive 60 to 80,000 more forces? If next year you determine that additional forces are required, do you have the flexibility to ask for more? While we've heard about top-line numbers, we've not heard discussion about the composition of these forces. How many combat brigades will deploy? How many will be trainers? Will each combat brigade receive all its enablers? Will the cap of the 30,000 forces make you choose between adding combat forces or enablers? General, Ambassador, this is your opportunity to answer the critics and bolster the supporters of this strategy. No one is more qualified to do this than you. Again, thank you for being here. Good luck and Godspeed in your mission.